It began on a sleeting Tuesday afternoon, when the wind gnawed at the windows of St. Jude's College in Cambridge, and the streets echoed with the hush of an unexpected snow. Inside the old, ivy-clad walls of the history department, a curious silence hung over the office of Dr. Lionel Ellison, a scholar of Renaissance manuscripts, a man of rigorous routine, and now an unexpected absentee, the first to notice something. A miss was Sarah Pembroke, a graduate student of Ellison's, who arrived just after 1 o'clock for their weekly appointment. The corridor smelled faintly of old paper and polish, and the flickering wall lamps struggled against the gloom. She knocked twice. Ellison was nothing if not punctual, and when no answer came, she hesitated. It wasn't like him to forget, not to be late, not to ignore a knock. After 5 minutes of waiting and a growing sense of unease, she tried the door. It was locked from the inside. A cleaner named Mr. Carmichael eventually fetched the head porter, who brought a master key. But even that failed. The bolt had been slid across from within. Finally, after some deliberation and a call to the bursar, a window cleaner was summoned to climb a ladder and look through the mullioned glass. What he saw prompted an immediate call to the police. Dr. Lionel Ellison lay slumped in his armchair, beside the hearth, his spectacles askew, one hand clutching a small ivory letter opener slicked with blood. His head lolled at an unnatural angle, and though the room appeared otherwise undisturbed, the air inside felt thick and wrong, as though it remembered something terrible. Detective Inspector Alec Marston arrived from Scotland Yard by evening, a tall, pinched man with a hawk's eye and a barrister's diction. By then, the snow had thickened into a steady veil over the city, muting footsteps and thoughts alike. He stepped into Ellison's study with gloved hands behind his back, surveying the room slowly, methodically. A fire still smoldered in the grate. A half-drunk cup of tea sat cold on the side table. Books lined the walls in perfect order. No overturned furniture, no signs of struggle. Yet the scene defied sense. The doctor had no visitors scheduled beyond Miss Pembroke. The windows were all latched from within. The chimney was far too narrow for entry or exit. The bolt on the door could only have been drawn from the inside. A locked room mystery, murmured Marston to Sergeant Wykes, his partner, who crouched beside the body taking notes, and one that makes a theater of its own absurdity. But it looks like suicide, doesn't it? Wykes replied uncertainly, single wound to the chest. No other injuries, no signs of break-in. Would a man stab himself through the heart with his own letter opener, then lean back in comfort, hands still clenched on the weapon? Marston shook his head. Besides, Ellison was right-handed. The wound enters from the left, angles. All wrong. The room gave little up for the next hour. A few ink blotters, a folder of marginalia on 16th century statecraft, an unfinished letter to an academic journal. Half-typed, yet near the hearth, something peculiar caught Marston's eye. A torn scrap of parchment, old, browned with age, not particularly out of place in the office of a historian. But this piece bore a single inked phrase in tight, archaic hand: silence is the final defense. Not an Ellison script. Have this tested, Marston ordered, passing it to Wykes, and find out if anyone else had access to this office after hours. I want every key accounted for. As the forensic team examined the scene, Marston wandered to the desk and began flipping through the top drawers. Neatly arranged papers, a fountain pen, a small tin of barley sugar, then wedged between 2 notebooks a black envelope. Heavy paper, no address. Inside, a folded card. Blank, no handwriting, just a faint, bitter scent of something metallic. And burnt. He said nothing, but slipped the envelope into his coat pocket. By the following morning, Marston's inquiries into Dr. Ellison's recent habits yielded contradictions. Sarah Pembroke insisted he had seemed tired, but otherwise composed during their last conversation. Professor Lettingby, a rival in the faculty, claimed Ellison had been growing paranoid, accusing the department of intellectual theft and sabotage. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hill, the secretary, insisted he had recently asked for copies of old faculty meeting minutes dating back to 1947. Why? What had happened in that year? And what was the significance of that scrap of parchment? Wykes returned with updates. The handwriting on the parchment was identified as pre-modern. likely from the 16th century. But the ink was fresh days old at most, a fake antique, then, said Marston. Planted, perhaps. But for what purpose? The postmortem confirmed cause of death. Cardiac trauma from a narrow, deep wound. No signs of hesitation or defensive marks. But beneath Ellison's fingernails were faint traces of wax sealing wax, red and an unfamiliar synthetic fiber, almost like velvet. Marston returned that evening to the study, now cleaned and reopened. He sat in Ellison's chair, letting his eyes roam the walls. So many books, so much paper, yet something felt deliberately silent, curated. He stood, moved to the bookshelf beside the fireplace, third shelf down, a narrow gap. He pressed his fingers into the wood and the panel gave way. Inside was a hollow space, barely large enough for a showbox, but within it sat a rolled bundle of letters, tied with string, and a leather-bound diary. The first letter was dated 1947. It was a confession. A student, Rupert Linley, expelled that year for misconduct, accused of plagiarism, but secretly threatened by Ellison's predecessor, Dr. Carfax, for uncovering something damaging about the college's wartime records. The letters hinted at falsified credentials, illegal land dealings, and a suppressed manuscript once part of the college archive. The diary was Ellison's own, dating back 3 years. He had been searching for the missing manuscript, convinced it held secrets about the college's past. The last entry, dated to days before his death, read, "At last. The cipher breaks under pressure. The manuscript exists, not in the library, but hidden in the Carfax collection. Must move carefully. They are watching." That was all. Marston stood very still. Dr. Ellison hadn't been a victim of academic rivalry. He had discovered something, and someone had silenced him before he could speak. Detective Inspector Alec Marston sat alone in the faculty common room, the fire sputtering with a reluctant warmth as rain replaced snow beyond the leaded windows. In front of him lay the diary and the bundle of letters recovered from the hidden panel. He had not yet shared their discovery with the college, not with Wykes, not even with the coroner. The moment didn't feel right. Ellison had died with secrets clenched around his heart, and Marston could feel their weight pressing in now. Patient but urgent. The next morning, the college was abuzz with quiet speculations cloaked in academic decorum. Faculty meetings were canceled. Students whispered in corridors. Dr. Carfax's name, long dead and until now forgotten, was starting to resurface, but no one could yet articulate why. Marston returned to Ellison's study just after dawn, before the cleaning staff had resumed their routines. The study had been put back to rights, books neatly stacked, papers aligned, carpet vacuumed to erase the grim outlines of death. But the detective wasn't looking for what was visible. He stood in the center of the room, closing his eyes briefly. What had Ellison seen in his last moments? What had he touched? What had he perhaps tried to hide? The desk yielded nothing new, nor did the bookshelves or waste bin. But something odd lingered in the air, faint, a trace of scent that didn't belong to pipe smoke or old wood. He turned toward the fireplace again, knelt, and examined the hearth more closely this time. Beneath the grate, among the ashes, he found it a blackened clump of wax, its red sheen still faintly visible. As he picked it out with tweezers, a soft hiss of crumbling ash followed. A wax seal, burnt, broken, but deliberately so. And next to it, half hidden beneath the edge of the fire brick, a small square of velvet, blue, almost silk-like, torn from something clothing, a pouch. It bore a faint gold thread along the edge. Marston placed both in a bag and made a note. Red wax, blue velvet, not university colors, not ceremonial garb. Something different. As he stood, he heard movement outside the room, a low voice, cautious footsteps. He stepped into the corridor to find Sarah Pembroke, the graduate student, standing awkwardly at the far end. She startled at his appearance. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not," Marston replied. "Miss Pembroke." "A word, if you have a moment." She nodded hesitantly and followed him back inside. "Tell me again," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite Ellison's. "What did you and the doctor discuss during your last meeting?" She sat slowly. He was distracted, more than usual. "I asked him about the notes he'd given me, and he seemed to lose track of what we were discussing. Then he said something strange. What was it? She hesitated, then said, "He told me that silence was a kind of shield, that sometimes not publishing something is more important than discovery." I thought he was just tired. Marston watched her closely. Had he ever mentioned Dr. Carfax to you? No, she replied quickly, almost too quickly. Not really. Just in passing. He referred to him as part of the old guard. I assumed he meant the post-war faculty. Did Dr. Ellison trust you? Her lips parted, then closed again. I think so. He had no family, no children, no close colleagues. I suppose I was convenient, but he never confided anything personal. Not even about the manuscript. Sarah blinked. What manuscript? There was no flicker of recognition in her face. Marston believed her for now. After she left, he asked Wykes to assemble a list of everyone who had access to the Carfax collection, which was kept under restricted cataloging in the special archives room at the college library. The archivist on duty, a short man named Mr. Bullen with eyes like cloudy marbles, provided the logbook. 3 names had signed in over the past week: Dr. Lionel Ellison, Professor Giles Lettingby, and surprisingly Reverend Dr. Francis Toller. Toller was the college chaplain, a mild, unremarkable man known more for sermonizing on hope and humility than for scholarly endeavors. Marston made his way across the quad to the chapel, where Toller was polishing the silver candelabra in preparation for evensong. The clergyman greeted him with a gentle smile. "Inspector, a sad business, Lionel's death. He was a solitary man, but I always admired his discipline. You signed into the Carfax collection last week," Marston said without preamble. "May I ask why?" Toller blinked, and his hand paused on the candelabra. "Ah, yes. I was researching a series of benefactions made by the college during the 1950s for a commemorative address, part of our anniversary planning, you see. Do you often consult special archives for commemorative addresses?" The clergyman's smile faded just slightly. "Not often, but Dr. Ellison encouraged it. He said I might find something useful. Suggested a file number. In fact, curious, isn't it? What was in the file? Financial records and some correspondence, but nothing remarkable. Routine matters, really. Did you show it to him?" "I know. I meant to, but he passed before I had the chance." Toller turned back to his polishing, but his hand trembled slightly now. Marston left him there, the scent of brass polish mingling with candle wax. He didn't believe the Reverend, not entirely. The timing was too neat, and Ellison's name, written next to Toller's in the log, appeared in a different ink. Back at his flat, Marston reviewed the photographs of Ellison's study one more time. The teacup, the fire, the faint traces of red wax. Then something struck him: the letter opener, ivory-handled, narrow-bladed, part of a matching set. He pulled up the image of Ellison's desk drawer again. The penknife was missing, a blade missing from a scholar's matched set, a faintly burned seal, a blue velvet edge, and a man who had discovered a truth buried deep in the past, smothered by years of polite silence. A pattern was beginning to form, but its shape still flickered like a figure half seen in fog. Tomorrow, Marston would visit the Carfax collection himself, and this time he would not ask permission. The next morning broke with pale light and the quiet hush of a campus holding its breath. Snow had crusted into brittle ice, coating the flagstones of the quadrangle. Detective Inspector Marston arrived at the college library just as the archivist, Mr. Bullen, was unlocking the inner gates of the restricted wing. Without waiting for formalities, Marston showed his warrant and requested access to the Carfax collection. Bullen hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. The Carfax papers aren't generally browsed unsupervised. Some of them are delicate. Marston's tone hardened. "A man is dead, and the answers may lie in these boxes. I'll need the file Dr. Ellison accessed, as well as anything removed or altered in the last month." With visible reluctance, Bullen led him to a climate-controlled annex tucked behind thick glass doors. Inside, rows of iron shelving stood, like silent sentinels, each bearing numbered archive boxes. The air scented faintly with old vellum and rusted staples. Marston watched the archivist pull down 3 boxes. "This is the one Ellison viewed. File for 7B. And here this was requested by Reverend Toller. File for 7D. Marston opened the lids one by one. The for 7B file held letters from 1947 correspondence between Dr. Carfax and the college bursar. Most were dry financial matters, but midway through the stack, a thin envelope bore an unfamiliar seal red wax, broken and unmarked, save for a faint gold smear like dust dot inside. A letter. The manuscript cannot be destroyed. Lock it away, conceal it, but do not underestimate the danger of its contents. Silence is our duty. Let it be the final defense. Unsigned. Marston's pulse quickened. The same phrase as the parchment scrap found in Ellison's study. Yet this letter was written in a different hand, older, coarser, with uneven pressure. He turned to file for 7D. It was sparse. Just a few donor receipts and a bound ledger of alumni events. Nothing that could have held Toller's attention for long. Something was missing. He looked up. Has anything been removed from this file in the last week? Bullen blinked. Not that I wait. He pulled a logbook from the desk. Yes, one folder was taken for digitization. A personal memoir by Dr. Carfax, not due back until next week. I want it now, Marston said coldly. I can make a call, do it. While Bullen disappeared into the back office, Marston placed the mysterious letter into an evidence pouch. Someone had wanted to erase this trail, but not entirely. The broken seal, the phrase left behind. This wasn't just secrecy. It was staged secrecy. A performance. Back outside, Marston began speaking again to the people orbiting Ellison's final days. This time, he approached Professor Giles Lettingby, who wore his academic gown like armor, and greeted the detective with a performative sigh of patience. I'm not sure what I can offer you, Lettingby said, reclining in his leather armchair. I hadn't spoken to Lionel in weeks. Our interests diverged. He buried himself in dusty Latin. I prefer practical political history. You signed into the Carfax collection 2 days before Ellison died. Lettingby blinked, then smiled a little too quickly. Did I? Must have been a casual browse, looking for something on 19th century faculty debates. Odd place to look. Most of the Carfax files predate that. Well, I suppose I was misdirected. Happens. These archives are an alphabet soup. Marston said nothing. Lettingby's fingers drummed against the armrest. A slight sheen had begun to form on his forehead. Dr. Ellison was concerned about something. Marston continued. Perhaps you noticed a change in his behavior. Oh, he was always a little eccentric. Brilliant, of course, but he'd become fixated on the past, as though history held personal grudges, paranoia. I'd call it. Did he ever mention a manuscript? Lettingby's eyes flicked, just once, to the desk before him. Manuscript, no. He was editing some treatise, I think. Didn't discuss it with me. The hesitation was small, but Marston caught it. Next, he found Sarah Pembroke in the college garden, notebook in hand. Though her pen hovered idle above the page, she looked up at his approach, brushing snow from the bench beside her. Miss Pembroke, he said gently, I need to ask again, did Dr. Ellison confide in you in any way, even obliquely? She exhaled slowly. He said things now and then, cryptic things. I thought they were metaphorical, about silence, about betrayal. I didn't press, did he seem afraid? Yes, not overtly, but there was this moment last week. He handed me a book and asked me to keep it for him, said it might go missing otherwise. I thought he was just being dramatic. Where's the book? She reached into her satchel and drew out a thin volume, Ciphers and Codes in Tudor England. Marston flipped through it and stopped at page 184. A small corner was folded inward, marking a passage on invisible ink and marginal ciphers. He flipped the book toward the light, and there, just beneath the margin, faint under normal view, a line of ink shimmered. Carfax lied. The ledger is incomplete. 1947. 5th of March, hidden. With lemon juice, revealed only under heat or direct light. Did you read this? Marston asked, glancing up. She shook her head. Pale now. No, I didn't know it was there. He believed her. This time, the fear in her eyes was not false. By late afternoon, the digitized memoir had arrived from the off-site lab. Marston read it under a shaded lamp in the records room. The memoir, penned by Dr. Carfax in spidery handwriting, was largely banal travel notes, dinner menus, committee minutes. But tucked at the end was a line, crossed out, then rewritten. The boy knew too much. Linley threatened to expose the ministry's agreement. I buried the file. The bursar agreed. Silence was our shield. Linley. Rupert Linley, the expelled student from 1947. Ellison had uncovered his name in the hidden letters. Now it appeared again. In the memoir Carfax had tried to erase, Marston closed the folder. The deception was no longer passive. Someone had shaped this silence, crafted it like a tomb. Ellison had not merely been killed for what he found but for daring to turn silence into speech. Now Marston had the motive. What he needed was the killer. The reading room was nearly empty when Marston stepped out of the archives. The daylight had retreated behind thick clouds, and the hush of falling snow returned like a memory pressing against the windows. In his coat pocket, he carried copies of the final pages of Carfax's memoir, the photograph of the lemon ink message, and the names now repeating like a chant in his mind: Ellison, Linley, Carfax, Lettingby, Toller. Each name glowed with its own shadow, and yet no single one cast the murder in full light. He walked slowly toward the bursar's office, where the old oak-panelled corridor seemed to contract with the weight of years. The current bursar, Mr. Archibald Derry, was a frail man with paper-thin skin and a clipped manner. When Marston introduced himself, Derry adjusted his spectacles with a trembling hand and waved him into a dim-lit office that smelled of oilskin and dry ink. "I knew Lionel, of course," he said, settling behind his desk. "Terribly tragic. We all admired his work, even if we didn't always understand it. I'm here about 1947, Marston said without softening, about Rupert Linley, and financial irregularities linked to the Carfax files. Your records from that year are incomplete." The bursar's jaw twitched. "Are they? I wouldn't know. I wasn't appointed until 59. The old guard ran things rather differently back then. Would any of those men still be living?" Derry paused. "One, perhaps, Mr. Richard Amory, assistant to the bursar in 47. He lives in Surrey, retired long ago. Would he remember Linley? I doubt it. The matter was settled decades ago." Marston nodded, unconvinced. Dr. Ellison believed otherwise. He thought the truth had been buried. Derry's fingers tapped the edge of his chair. "And what truth is that, Inspector? That the college protected its reputation? That one man's expulsion served as a convenient silence? You're admitting to it, then?" "No." Derry's voice turned cold. "I'm admitting only that old institutions run on the illusion of permanence. Break that, and everything collapses." Marston left without replying. Outside, snow fell in thickening silence. He stopped at a bench in the quad, pulled out his notebook, and began drawing connections not just between names, but between motives. Ellison had been on the verge of revealing something. That was now clear. The Carfax memoir confirmed Linley had uncovered a secretan agreement between the college and a wartime ministry, likely involving land or finances misappropriated during the post-war rebuilding years. Linley had threatened exposure and been expelled. Carfax had overseen it, and the bursar at the time had, by all indications, helped cover it. But those men were either dead or dying. So why kill Ellison now? That question didn't lead to a straight answer. It split into for Lettingby. He had access to the archives. He had lied about his reason for visiting them. And he had the most to lose professionally if Ellison's discovery discredited Carfax's legacy. Lettingby's own work, built partly on Carfax's methodology, would unravel. Toller, a man of the cloth, soft-spoken, but he had inserted himself into the archive trail. His name was in the log, and he had lied about what he found. And then there was the odd phrase Ellison had repeated to Sarah, "silence as a shield." Marston had seen that phrasing again and again. It had the echo of a creed. Was it possible the Reverend believed he was upholding something sacred? Sarah, a promising student, earnest, but Ellison had trusted her enough to hide the ciphered book. With her, either she was entirely innocent or very clever. And then there was Derry, old, yes, but with a sharp mind still buried beneath his brittle exterior. He had more than institutional loyalty to protect. If any modern evidence tied the college's current assets to fraud from 1947, the college's finances could collapse. Each suspect had a motive, but none explained the entire puzzle. And then Marston remembered the missing blade, the penknife from Ellison's desk set, the one not found at the scene. A small detail, but one that refused to settle. He returned to his temporary office above the porter's lodge, where Sergeant Wykes was waiting with updates. Postmortems finalized, Wykes reported. Something odd, trace elements of a stabilizing compound in the bloodstream, not fatal, but enough to cause drowsiness. We think it was slipped into the tea. Marston's jaw tightened. So Ellison was drugged before the stab wound. Seems that way. Also, the red wax analysis confirms it's of recent origin. Less than a week old. Synthetic blend. Not common. Could you trace where it's sold? Already started. Only 3 suppliers in the UK stock that exact formula. Marston tapped the desk. Good. What about fingerprints on the archive box? Smudged, mostly. But we got a partial off the envelope in file for 7B. He handed over a photograph. It wasn't Ellison's fingerprint, and it wasn't Lettingby's. The match came back. As Francis Toller, Marston stared at the photo, a reverend who breaks a seal, then lies about what he saw. He stood and buttoned his coat. Time to see the good man again. This time, Toller received him in his quarters, small, spare, and perfectly ranged. The man sat beside a low fire, a leather-bound prayer book resting on his knee. He looked up with the same benign smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've come with more questions, I expect," he said. "I've come with answers, Dr. Toller," Marston replied. "You opened a letter in the Carfax file. You handled an envelope with a red wax seal. Your fingerprint was on it." Toller's expression remained calm, but his fingers tightened around the prayer book. "I never denied opening it. I simply said I didn't recall anything unusual," which was a lie. Marston said evenly. "Ellison was drugged, then stabbed. He found something you wanted suppressed." Toller stood. "Inspector, I'm not a violent man, no," Marston said, stepping closer. "But I believe you enabled one." Toller's breath caught. His composure faltered for the first time. "I didn't kill him," he said softly. "But I knew what Carfax had done. I read the memoir before returning it. I read everything." "Why?" "Lie because the truth would destroy the college Ellison wanted to publish. I begged him not to. I said we could give it to the board quietly, preserve the institution without scandal. He refused." "So you told someone?" Toller sat down again, his face pale. "Yes, Lettingby. I thought he could reason with Lionel." Marston stared at him. "You passed the name along and someone acted. That makes you complicit, Dr. Toller." The Reverend swallowed hard. "I never meant for him to die." Marston said nothing. He stepped back into the cold, wind sharpening in the dusk. He didn't yet have a killer, but now he had the shape of the crime. Ellison had uncovered the truth, and someone, perhaps Lettingby, perhaps another, had decided that truth was worth a man's life. The next morning, the papers were already braying for closure. "Tragedy at St. Jude's, scholar killed over wartime secret," ran the headline in the Telegraph. The college, eager to contain scandal, issued a terse statement confirming that a suspect was in custody and assisting police with inquiries. Lettingby had been arrested just after dawn. Marston had not authorized it. He arrived at the station to find Wykes with a clipboard and a weary expression, pacing the corridor outside the interview room. Inside, Lettingby sat still, pale and fuming beneath a veneer of worn self-control. "They've got motive, means, and a witness placing him near the study the night before," Wykes explained. "Security footage from the side gate. No audio, but timestamp checks out." Marston scanned the report. Lettingby had allegedly left the faculty dining hall early that evening and passed through the college grounds just after 9 p.m. roughly, the time Ellison's tea would have been cooling. He had no alibi for the rest of the night. When questioned, he'd admitted to visiting the archives but denied knowledge of any plot. "He says he argued with Ellison, nothing more," Wykes added. "About academic ethics, mostly. Something to do with publication rights." Marston watched the man behind the glass. Lettingby sat like someone who believed in the weight of institutions, that if he just waited long enough, the process would clear him. But Marston couldn't shake the silence Ellison had died in. Too clean, too intentional. "I want to speak with him," he said, and stepped inside. Lettingby looked up, then away. "I'm being scapegoated, you realize, maybe," Marston said. "Or maybe you're the only one. Who got sloppy? I didn't kill him. Tell me again about your visit to the archives." "I told your sergeant. I was looking for correspondence between Carfax and early post-war reform committees. I was planning a paper. I asked the archivist to check a few file numbers. You also knew Toller had warned Ellison off." Lettingby hesitated. He said Lionel was poking into things better left buried, but that wasn't unusual. Lionel was always poking. "And did you tell anyone else? Share what Ellison had found?" "No. I went to him. I told him to be cautious. I told him he was being reckless." Marston leaned forward slightly. "Why were you on the college grounds that night?" "I forgot a file in the senior common room. I had been working late. There was no crime then, just a winter evening and a forgotten folder." "You didn't knock on Ellison's door?" "No. His light was off." Marston let the silence draw out. Lettingby stared at the table. "Then why?" the detective asked. Softly, "Was your fingerprint on the cup in his study?" That was a bluff. Marston hadn't yet run the print, but Lettingby flinched, just enough to betray himself. He started, then stopped. "You drank with him that night," Marston said, "and you let yourself out." Lettingby's face crumpled. "I did go in. Briefly. He invited me. We argued. I drank tea, mine, not his. I left before 10. He was alive when I left. I swear it." He might have been telling the truth. Marston stepped out. "He didn't kill Ellison," he said quietly. "To Wykes, he might have wanted to, but he didn't." "But what about the cup?" "There were 2 cups. We never tested both. The drug was in Ellison's. The other may well be clean." Wykes frowned. "You think the killer came after Lettingby left?" "I think the killer was counting on someone like Lettingby being caught first." A wave of satisfaction had already begun washing over the college. The acting dean sent out a memo praising the efficiency of the authorities. The bursar arranged for a discreet ceremony in Ellison's name. The faculty settled, like dust over a closed book, but Marston couldn't let go of the details. The penknife was still missing. The one piece of the matched desk set that hadn't turned up. A day later, a cleaner named Lena Farrow came forward with something curious. She had been dusting a disused storeroom on the 3rd floor of the library tower, normally locked, when she found something wedged behind a radiator, wrapped in an old sock, crusted with dust. Was the missing knife cleaned, carefully wiped, but unmistakable? Marston studied the blade under the lab's lights. The cleaning had been to good sterile wipes, perhaps, something that wouldn't raise alarms during a routine inspection. But the sock was cheap wool with a manufacturer's tag. He asked the campus laundry for a list of recent orders. Only one person on staff used that brand regularly. The college secretary, Mrs. Marion Hill. Polite, efficient, a fixture in the background of every faculty event. She had coordinated the archive retrievals, scheduled room access, had keys to almost everything. Marston visited her in the administrative wing that afternoon. Her office smelled of ink and lavender polish. She looked up with a practiced smile. "Detective, I was just reading the update. Such a relief you've made an arrest." "Is it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because something doesn't fit. Not with Lettingby." She tilted her head. "How do you mean? You've been with the college nearly 30 years, haven't you? You worked under Dr. Carfax." She lowered her eyes. "Briefly, yes. I was very young. You handled his records, typed his memos, saw his correspondence." "Yes." "Do you remember Rupert Linley?" The pause was slight, but it was there. "I remember the name." Marston laid the cleaned sock on the desk. Her breath caught. So soft, so quick. It could have been a hiccup, but it wasn't. He didn't press further, not yet. Instead, he asked to borrow the college key inventory. And there it was, a single, quiet note. Marion Hill had access to the locked tower room where the knife was found. A room no one else had entered in over a year. That night, Marston walked the empty quad, snow crunching beneath his feet. He knew now that the killer hadn't acted alone. Toller had warned Ellison off. Lettingby had argued with him. But it was Mrs. Hill, unassuming, loyal, and invisible, who moved behind them all. She had been the thread holding the institutions, silenced together for decades, and when Ellison threatened to unravel it, she did what she believed was necessary. The knife, the tea, the sealed letter, each piece had been part of her methodical effort. But now, with Lettingby in custody and the case all but closed, she would feel safe again. And that's when Marston knew she would make her move. Because people like Mrs. Hill didn't leave things half done. The wind scraped through the eaves of St. Jude's that night, rasping like a memory long denied. Inside the porter's lodge, Marston sat with his sleeves rolled and eyes fixed on the open file before him, not from this case, but from another, older and dustier, retrieved from municipal records hours earlier with a single phrase echoing through his mind, Rupert Linley. He had expected little. The boy's name had been buried in academic silence, his story reduced to a footnote. But here, in the pale pages of an incident report from 1947, was something more, a citation for trespass. The report described a break-in at a government records office near Cambridge. A young man had been found rifling through wartime property, acquisition documents, land titles, ministry payouts, faculty appointments. The report never went to court. Charges were dropped, but the signature on the dismissal order struck Marston like a bell. Richard Amory. The same man the bursar had named the former assistant who had worked under Carfax. Marston's pen tapped twice against the table. This wasn't just academic scandal. Ellison had been closing in on something wider. A cover-up not limited to reputation, but to state secrets, land transfers, misappropriated war relief, hidden behind the weight of scholarship. And now, nearly 80 years later, the same names were circling back. He pulled out the transcript of Ellison's last known letter, the one addressed to the editorial board, but never sent. Buried within a footnote, almost parenthetical, was a phrase that now caught his attention anew. Mrs. M.H., formerly registrar's clerk, filed the 5th of March 1947 ledger under a false code. Cross-reference missing entirely from the annual index. Mrs. M.H. Marion Hill. Back then, she'd have been barely out of school, a junior clerk, learning to file, obedient, unnoticed. But now she was the keeper of keys, the organizer of time and memory, and she'd remained unchanged, unchallenged while generations passed through the college. Marston turned to Wykes, who had just returned from speaking to the lab. She handled the knife. Wykes confirmed. Traces of the same wool from the sock found in her flat matched her laundry tags. We also found wax residue in her desk drawer, a stick of that same synthetic red, almost used up. Did she buy it? No receipts, but we're checking. Local suppliers. She could have gotten it through stationery procurement. Unlisted items are easy to bury. Marston closed the file slowly. She's going to destroy something. Wykes looked up. She cleaned the knife and hid it because she wanted the case to end. Now it looks like it has. But she's still tying loose ends. She won't stop until the truth is buried again. That truth was growing clearer. It wasn't just the manuscript Ellison had been uncovering. It was the web behind it, the way Carfax and his circle had manipulated the post-war. Years for power and privilege. Linley had found proof of it in 1947, and Ellison had found Linley's letters. And now, somewhere between the remaining fragments of the archive and Mrs. Hill's quietly methodical destruction, that truth was hanging by a thread. At 8:30, Marston returned to the college. The administration wing was dark, save for a single lamp glowing in Mrs. Hill's office. He knocked once and stepped inside. She looked up, unsurprised. "You're working late," he said. "There's always something to file," she replied, calm and precise. "The past never puts itself away." "You knew Linley," Marston said. Her hands stilled. "I typed the expulsion letter they made. Me read it twice, to harsh the first time, to vague the second. He trusted you." She looked at him, eyes clear and dry. He was just a boy. He thought truth could stand on its own. But truth is fragile. It needs protection, or it gets crushed. And Ellison, he was going to shout it from the rooftops. A scandal, names, dates, documents. You think it would have changed the world. No, just ruined people, good people. People who did what they thought was right after a terrible war. But it wasn't right. No, she said softly, but it was done. And done things must be folded away. Marston moved closer. What are you protecting? Carfax? The college, yourself. I don't know anymore, she whispered. Maybe just the quiet. Ellison couldn't leave it alone. He dug and dug, and every night I saw his lamp burning. He left notes in books, in drawers, as if begging to be found. He made it impossible to ignore. So you poisoned him. Her fingers gripped the drawer handle, then released it. I poured the compound into his tea, enough to make him sleep. I just wanted to take the letters back, just to burn them, but then I saw the knife. I thought if he wakes and finds me, I panicked. You stabbed him. No, I didn't. Her voice caught. That wasn't me. Marston froze. Then who? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into the drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Rupert sent me a letter after he was expelled. I never showed it to anyone. I filed it under miscellaneous correspondence, a code I used for things too heavy to throw out, too dangerous to keep close. Marston opened it. The letter was a rambling, angry confession. Linley outlined what he'd found: a collusion between Carfax, Amory, and an unnamed bursar to siphon war funds through dummy acquisitions. He believed his discovery would not only lead to criminal charges, but implicate powerful men at the ministry. But one name was circled twice. Francis Toller, a theological student then. A listener, Linley called him. The one who always stood nearby, notebook in hand, quiet as shadow. Toller hadn't merely inherited the secrets. He had been there from the beginning. Marston looked up at Mrs. Hill, who nodded slowly. He was never just the chaplain. He was the keeper. The storm outside had begun to howl, wind rattling the stained glass windows of the college like something demanding entry. Marston stood. We need to find him. But even as he said it, he knew Toller was already gone. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the college in a brittle frost. A white veil had settled over the rooftops, glistening under a pale sun. Yet the quiet that blanketed St. Jude's was not peace, but tension held taut by silence. The chaplain's rooms stood empty. His overcoat and clerical collar were gone. The porters had seen him leave before dawn, a suitcase in one hand, a paper parcel in the other, walking not toward the train station, but down the canal path behind the chapel. Wykes arrived breathless at Marston's door. Nothing at the vicarage. His lodgings are cleared out. No notes, no phone signal. But we caught a break. We pulled every CCTV feed between here and Ely. There's one clip. He's at a post office 15 miles north. He posted something. Large envelope. Did you trace the parcel? Interception request is in, but no confirmation yet. Marston rubbed his temples. He's not fleeing. Not properly. He's too methodical. He's trying to bury the last piece. Do we know what that is? Marston stared out at the frosted lawn. He let Hill do the dirty work, then let Lettingby take the blame. But Ellison must have had something too dangerous to destroy outright, something even Toller wouldn't risk being found holding. Then why not burn it? Because it wouldn't stay burnt. He turned sharply. I need access to Ellison's bank box. An hour later, with legal clearance from the coroner, Marston and Wykes stood before a small brass-fronted safe at the Oxford branch of Holter & Sons, its location found scribbled on a torn slip in Ellison's desk. The manager turned the key and stepped aside. Inside the box was only one item, a worn, leather-bound journal marked R.L. Rupert Linley's diary, its spine cracked as Marston opened it. Pages scrawled with meticulous, almost obsessive entries, cross-references to archival codes, dates of private interviews with staff long dead, underlined words like duplicate, hidden copy, unburied proof. And there it was, the entry from March 6, 1947. Today I delivered a copy of the memorandum to Toller. I told him I feared it would be destroyed. I begged him to protect it just in case. Wykes leaned closer. So Toller had the duplicate all this time and never destroyed it. Probably kept it sealed away in case he ever needed it like a failsafe. And now he sent it off. But to whom? Marston closed the diary and stared into the shadows of the bank vault. Toller was too clever to send it to the press knot. With his name in the margins, he needed someone who would lock it away again. Someone with a stake in silence. University lawyers. Wykes offered. Too obvious. No, he's playing the long game. That evening, Marston called a meeting. In the senior common room. Present were the acting dean, Mrs. Hill, and at her request, Sarah Pembroke. The others had been excused. Marston explained the diary's contents and Rupert Linley's trust in Toller. He laid out what they already knew but kept one card. Hidden, Mrs. Hill, he said, turning to her. Do you recall Ellison speaking about a duplicate ledger? She nodded cautiously. He mentioned it once, said it was useless without corroboration. Marston stepped to the fireplace and placed a small parcel on the mantel wrapped in brown paper. Tied with string, the room shifted subtly. Hill looked at it first, then Sarah. I believe this is what Toller posted this morning, Marston said quietly. Intercepted en route to the diocesan archives in Chichester. We received confirmation from Royal Mail 20 minutes ago. Neither woman spoke, Marston continued. Inside, I suspect, is the last surviving copy of the Carfax-Linley memorandum. Names, figures, locations, the paper trail Linley uncovered and Ellison tried to revive. He turned now, slowly, letting the silence breathe. I haven't opened it, but I thought we might do so together. Sarah flinched slightly, then recovered. But Mrs. Hill, she shifted in her seat, almost imperceptibly. Her eyes remained on the parcel, her lips parting just faintly. I'll prepare a knife, Marston said, drawing the letter opener from the sideboard. The irony wasn't lost on him. Unless someone would prefer to explain what we'll find. The pause that followed was charged. Then Sarah spoke, quietly. I think we're all tired of the guessing game. She stood. Marston tilted his head. You know what's inside. I know what was meant to be. She stepped toward the parcel. Dr. Toller didn't post the real memorandum. He sent a decoy. And the original, Sarah reached into her satchel. From it, she drew a slim envelope, unsealed. Inside, folded with careful creases, was an aged, onion-skin memorandum bearing the seal of the Ministry of Housing, dated March 5th. 19 for 7. Mrs. Hill gasped aloud. Sarah looked up at Marston. Ellison gave it to me the day before he died. He said, if anything happened to him, to wait, that the time would reveal its own allies. Marston took the document and unfolded it slowly. Names danced across it: Carfax, Amory, Toller. A list of altered land records, falsified bursary grants, a misappropriated wartime restoration fund amounting to nearly £100,000. Untraceable now, but damning in paper. And you never said a word, Hill whispered. All this time, I didn't know whom to trust, until the wrong man was arrested. Marston exhaled. So you set a trap? Sarah nodded. I suspected Toller was watching me. I dropped hints that I had something. I let him overhear that I might give it to the archives. I knew he'd intercept it, try to bury it again. And instead, you kept the original, Marston said. He wasn't the only one playing the long game, she replied. Mrs. Hill rose from her chair. Her composure was cracking like thin ice. It's also pointless now, she said. We protected them for what? For a college that forgot them all. Marston stepped between her and the fire. No, you protected silence. But silence has a half-life, and it's expired. That night, the real memorandum was placed into evidence. Lettingby was released by morning. Toller's face reappeared 2 days later on a coastal ferry's passenger manifest. Headed toward Normandy, his arrest followed swiftly. But in the quiet that return to St. Jude's, Marston stood once more in Ellison's study, the scent of old books still lingering. The past hadn't simply reached into the present, it had never truly left. It had just been waiting, very patiently, to speak again. Marston kept the memorandum under lock and constant surveillance, its existence now pivotal not just for the resolution of Ellison's murder, but for the integrity of everything the case had unraveled. It had become more than evidence, it was a keystone. Without it, the structure of the truth would collapse back into rumor and institutional denial. 2 armed officers rotated 12-hour watches at the district evidence vault, tucked inside a municipal complex on the edge of Oxford. Wykes delivered a sealed photocopy to the Crown Prosecution Office by courier, and Sarah's testimony had been taken and verified under caution. Even Mrs. Hill, now suspended and under investigation, had offered to cooperate, though with each interview she seemed more detached, more brittle, as though whatever purpose had sustained her for so many years had cracked and slipped away. Yet Marston couldn't shake the unease that had settled into his bones. Something was too smooth. To neat. That night, his phone rang at 2:04 a.m. He was already awake. It was Wykes. His voice was taut. Double quotes, "Sir, you need to come down to the vault now." Marston dressed in silence and drove through empty streets, slick with freezing rain. The evidence facility was swarming. Yellow tape, radio chatter, the metallic scent of adrenaline in the air. A security guard was being tended by paramedics, his nose bloodied, eyes dazed. Wykes met him just inside. "We've been compromised," he said. "The main archive vault, forced entry, clean, professional, keypad override." The guards were gassed. "We found them unconscious just after 1. The Ellison file, gone." Marston stood still. "All of it?" he asked, low. Wykes nodded. "The original memorandum, the envelope, the packaging, everything." "What about the surveillance feed?" "We're pulling it now. But the drives were swapped mid-shift. It's a blind spot. They used a maintenance passcode, someone with inside clearance." Marston turned sharply. This wasn't desperation. This was preparation. Someone knew we'd intercept the parcel. "They've been watching from the start. Could be Hill," Wykes muttered. "Or someone else entirely. Someone higher." But Marston was already thinking further. This wasn't a rogue act of loyalty, it was strategy. Toller had fled. Hill was under watch. Yet someone, somewhere, still believed that truth could be erased if you were quick enough. Later that morning, they received a new envelope at the station. No return address. Postmarked locally. Inside was a photograph. The memorandum. Burned, only a corner left intact. The rest curled into black flakes over cracked slate. A note in clean, looping handwriting accompanied it. "Proof is a matter of survival, and survival belongs to the discreet." Marston read it twice. Then again. There was no signature. He placed the note on the table and called Sarah Pembroke. She arrived 30 minutes later, hair damp from rain, face pale and resolute. "We were watched," he said. "Toller didn't act alone. Someone got to the vault. Someone with access. The memorandum's gone. But the photocopy," Marston shook his head. "It won't stand. Not in court. Not alone. Defense will say it's fabricated. Chain of custody compromised. No original, no case." Sarah stared at the note, her jaw tightening. "So they win." "No," he said. "But the field has shifted. They've erased the past again. We need something they can't erase." He stood and began pacing. "What else did Ellison leave? Any duplicates, references, journal entries?" "He kept field notes," she said. "But nothing I've seen mentions another copy. Think harder. A photograph, a name, a connection." She frowned. "Wait, there was a drawer in his study. Locked. I assumed it was personal. He never let me near it." Marston grabbed his coat. "Then let's find the key." They returned to Ellison's rooms, now sealed but not yet cleared. The study still smelled faintly of bergamot and dust. His overcoat hung from a hook on the back of the door. Sarah knelt by the lower desk drawer, a brass lock glinting dully. "No key," she said. Marston turned the overcoat pockets inside out. "Nothing." He walked to the bookcase, scanning each spine, then paused. A copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses loose in the binding. He opened it. Inside was a slim envelope. Taped to its back was a tiny brass key. Moments later, the drawer clicked open. Inside lay 3 things: a small notebook with no title, a microfilm reel, and a folded map of the college grounds. The notebook was Ellison's own, handwritten in cramped cursive, full of observations, half-thoughts, and a list of passwords and dates. The microfilm, labeled R.L. Duplicate Scarfax, 1947, was the real prize. "Microfilm," Sarah whispered. "Of the memorandum. More than that," Marston said, heart beginning to race. He copied the entire file. They rushed it to the university's preservation lab. Within the hour, the reel was processed and digitized. Not only did it contain Linley's memorandum, it included the original expulsion order, interdepartmental memos, and minutes from a secret meeting of the college council on March 12, 1947. A meeting chaired by Carfax, attended by Toller. Names, motives, signatures. Marston leaned back, stunned. He outplayed them. Sarah smiled faintly. He knew someone would try to erase the past, so he left it in the smallest format he could find. Film, Wykes said from behind them, grinning. The one thing no one uses anymore. And now, Sarah asked. Marston nodded slowly. Now we start again. But this time, they're too late. But even as they left the lab, Marston felt the chill creep in again. Someone had known the vault location. Someone had waited for just the right moment to strike. And someone out there was still watching. Marston awoke to the vibration of his phone. It was just past 5 a.m. The light outside his flat watery and reluctant. The voice on the line was Wykes, clipped and urgent. There's been another incident. Pembroke, she's gone. He was dressed and out the door in under 5 minutes. His coat barely buttoned as he slid into the squad car waiting. Outside, the ride to Sarah Pembroke's flat was brisk, no sirens, but every turn felt as slow. The front door had been forced clean, professional. Again, and the entry hall showed signs of rapid disarray. Drawers upended, cushions slashed, a shattered teacup still wet on the floor. A neighbor had reported muffled shouting sometime around 4, but thought nothing of it. There were no signs of a struggle, just absence. Marston stood in the middle of the kitchen and forced himself to remain still. Every instinct told him this wasn't a random break-in or a panic-induced flight. Sarah had been taken. The microfilm remained secure. The lab had made 3 copies overnight, all held under chain of custody with separate tags. But Sarah had been the only person who knew how Ellison cross-referenced the information, how to decode the annotations in Linley's diary. The film alone was damning, but usable. Not without her. He turned to Wykes. They're done with erasing. Now they're silencing. They questioned every neighbor, contacted every hospital, checked every route out of the city. Her car was still parked outside. No phones turned on, no digital footprint, no ping from her university ID badge. Then, 2 hours later, a letter arrived at Marston's precinct. Hand-delivered, unaddressed. He opened it carefully. The message was typed, cold and efficient. You are too close to something that has always required distance. You were warned once, through Ellison. You were warned again, through the fire. There will not be a third warning. At the bottom was a single line. Release Lettingby again. And you'll find her safe. Marston passed the paper to Wykes, who looked up with growing disbelief. They still think Lettingby holds something, or they're trying to control the narrative, make it look like we bungled it again. No, Marston said. They're buying time. We were one step from dragging this into the open. They couldn't burn the microfilm in time, so now they're holding the one person who can interpret it hostage. Lettingby's just a distraction. Marston sat heavily, tapping the side of his cup. He stared down the corridor, past officers and fluorescent lights, into the shape of something forming in the dark. Then he stood up. I need the Ellison files. The originals, not the summary sheets. Everything we boxed. Wykes returned with the folder within minutes. Marston spread the pages across the long table. There was Ellison's research log, the inventory of wartime personnel files, Carfax's teaching schedule from 1946, a photo of the college council taken in 1949, Linley, barely visible at the edge, Toller seated just behind Carfax, hands folded. But then Marston saw something, an old memo, half crumpled, dated October 1951. It was stamped confidential and marked for administrative eyes only. Subject, reassignment of Richard Amory post-fraud. Oversight, Ministry of National Archives. Marston sat back. Amory didn't retire quietly. He was placed, moved. Wykes frowned. But the ministry went silent about him. Publicly, he vanished. He didn't vanish. He got a desk with a view and a broom to sweep everything else under. Which means he's still alive. Wykes blinked. He'd be in his 90s. But someone's still collecting his pension. Someone's still protecting him. Marston moved fast after that. using the ministry's retirement pay database. He tracked down a pension address listed under Richard Amory's name paid to a joint account, with a second signer, Harold Denham, a clerical name, a shadow identity. By noon, they had traced it to a property on the South Coast, isolated, heavily secured, listed under a corporate shell. Marston secured a warrant. Two unmarked cars left Oxford in tight formation. They arrived just as the sea wind picked up long blades of grass bowing toward the low cliffs. The house was old stone, heavily renovated. An unmarked van sat in the driveway, engine still warm. Inside, the front room had been stripped of comfort. No personal effects, just files, boxes, a radio scanner, and a monitor displaying a traffic camera feed. A man was inside, frail, skeletal but sharp. Eyed. Richard Amory. He didn't resist. "You're late," he said, as if Marston were expected. Marston stepped inside. "Where is she?" "I don't know," Amory replied calmly. "But if you're here, that means someone's moving faster than I thought. I assume the film survived." Marston didn't answer. Amory continued. "You think you found the story, but you haven't." Ellison barely scratched it. Linley screamed into a void. "And I built the silence that kept it all from devouring the rest of us." "You killed Ellison." "No," Amory said. "I simply left the door unlocked." He gestured to a box marked redundancy files. Inside were records, typed confessions, newspaper clippings, even a list of safe houses used in the 1980s to hide defectors and, by the look of it, collaborators. "This isn't about one murder," Amory said. "It's about what a nation was willing to forget to rebuild itself." Marston stared at him. "You know where they've taken her," he said. Amory hesitated. "No, but I know where they would go." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card, an address, a chapel site long since deconsecrated on the edge of a moor in Northumberland. Marston took it. "If she's there," he said, "and if she's harmed, this all comes down on you." But Amory only smiled, as if finally the inevitable had arrived. "I spent my life burying a truth that never stopped breathing," he said. "Let's see what it looks like in the light." Marston left with the address in his hand and a grim certainty forming in his gut. The story wasn't ending. It was just waking up. The chapel loomed against the bruised sky, stone walls black with age and ivy clinging to its spine like veins. Marston stepped from the car into the wind, the kind that carried whispers and tugged at the back of his collar like a warning. Wykes followed silently, flashlight in hand. Though dusk still clung to the edges of the moor, the building was cold and silent, but not abandoned. A trail of boot prints, fresh, pointed, deliberate, led around the rear to a door recessed under a weather-worn arch. Marston pushed it open with a soft creak, his breath tight in his chest. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old paper. The pews had been pushed aside. At the far end of the nave, where the altar had once stood, a long table bore a map, 2 mobile phones, and a laptop powered by a petrol generator humming in the apps. No sign of Sarah, no sign of anyone, but someone had been here recently. Wykes swept the perimeter while Marston approached the map. It was a grid of the college's archive layout marked with colored pins and handwritten notations. Red indicated items taken, blue, copied, green, destroyed. Near the bottom was a column labeled key, 5 names: Linley, Carfax, Amory, Ellison, and beneath a deep scrawl M, Pembroke. At the table's edge, Marston noticed a small object, a brass fountain pen, cheap, unremarkable, but it had Ellison's initials etched faintly into the side. He turned it over and unscrewed the base. Inside, rolled tight as a matchstick, was a strip of microfilm. He stared at it, heart thudding. "Sir," Wykes called from the far end of the chapel. "Come look at this." Behind the pulpit, down a narrow stairwell, they found a small storage chamber. Inside, a camp bed, a thermos, and a wool coat. Sarah's. Folded on top was a note, written in pencil on university stationery. "They didn't need me, just wanted me to think they did. The film was never the end. There's something else, something they never found in Linley's things. I think it's still there. If I'm not back in 12 hours, assume I've gone looking." S.P. Marston exhaled slowly, though she left. Wykes said, brow furrowed, On her own, she realized what they missed, Marston said. And now she's trying to find it before they do. But what? We've seen everything. No, Marston murmured. We've seen what they thought mattered. But Ellison and Linley, they were both obsessed with the margins, the overlooked, the useless details. He turned back to the map. There, in the lower right corner of the archive layout, was a note written in different handwriting. Restricted, index for 7B, the Linley papers, deaccessioned, awaiting discard. Marston's mouth went dried at the Linley papers. Not the manuscript, not the memorandum. Something else. Wykes, get on the radio. Tell the university's archival department to halt all disposal processes. Now, lockdown index for 7B. The call was placed. 20 minutes later, confirmation came back. The collection was already in transit. A crate, labeled confidential deaccession, had been sent to a private shredding facility in Woking that morning. Marston was already moving. The drive was long and rain-slicked, the motorway soaked in a film of early night and tension. The processing depot sat on the edge of an industrial estate, tall fencing, floodlights, and the dull churn of machines. Inside, the clerk checked the manifest. One crate from Oxford. He confirmed. Haven't touched it yet. Too much backlog. Marston followed him to the intake bay, where a wooden crate sat among a dozen others. He pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, dash folders, dozens of them, most just student letters, discarded memos, handwritten reading logs. But one caught his attention, a narrow envelope, unsealed, addressed to Dr. Charles Carfax, personal, 1946. The letter inside was short, in Linley's unmistakable hand. Charles, you said once that truth was a matter of appetite, that those who could not digest it would always deny its taste. But I am tired of living hungry. The enclosed speaks for itself. Keep it or burn it. But know this, I no longer fear you, nor what follows. R.L. Attached to the letter with a rusted clip was a second sheet typed, formatted like an internal memo. It listed the names of 5 bursary students from 1946 and the amount awarded to each. Only one had a full sum. The others had been marked, partial issue pending approval from senior counsel. The full recipient, Francis Toller. Marston stepped back, the final thread pulled tight. It had always been about more than reputation. Toller wasn't merely a bystander. He was the one rewarded, the one protected from the beginning. Linley had uncovered it. Carfax had tried to contain it. Ellison had nearly published it. And Toller had built a life out of guarding the secret. Sir, Wykes said from behind him. That's it, isn't it? No, Marston said. That's the pattern. He looked again at the bursary sheet. There were annotations in the margins, code words, abbreviations. One line underlined and bracketed, again and again. Recipient status reassigned under condition of silence. Linley was never just shouting into the void, Marston said. He was documenting a transaction. Silence for survival. Complicity as currency. He stepped out into the wind. The pieces no longer floated unconnected. They spiraled inward, toward this one central transaction. Every silenced name, every vanished file, every altered record pointed back to this, the moment the college bought its peace with the future. Now they had the paper trail, the key, the final link, and somewhere out there, perhaps already watching, Sarah had known it, too. Marston turned to Wykes. We're not chasing ghosts anymore, he said. We're pulling back the veil. And in the far distance, thunder rolled once more across the moor. Marston didn't sleep that night. He sat hunched over the battered desk in his flat, the Linley letter beside him. Its ink faded but resolute. Wykes had taken the bursary records for immediate scanning and duplication. The crate from Woking was under police guard. The microfilm copies were distributed to 3 separate evidence vaults across the counties. And yet none of it made him feel any closer to the end, because something still hadn't surfaced. Something personal. It wasn't just the shape of the fraud, not just the institutional betrayal. Those things explained the cover-up. Yes, but not the murder. Not Ellison's last decision, nor Sarah's disappearance. It still didn't explain the moment of killing, the compulsion. He returned to the photo of the college council, staring at the stiff suits and faces long gone. His gaze kept returning to one man, Carfax, seated dead center, hands folded neatly, expression unreadable, not smug, not defiant, just measured, like he'd already calculated the fallout. Marston's phone vibrated at 3:37 a.m. It was a message from Wykes. Got something. Ellison's last recorded session archival tape from June. Audio only. Flagged as a duplicate, but not deleted. He was interviewing a former bursar clerk. Name, Gerald Clee. You'll want to hear it. He pressed play. The voice that emerged was Ellison's. Dry and precise. This is a continuation of Interview 14. Dr. Ellison with Mr. Gerald Clee. Retired clerk of bursaries, 1944 to 1961. Clee's voice was gravel, weary with age. We all knew. Of course. That's the thing they never understand. They think we stumbled into it. But it was right there in the memos, in the staff notes. It was all about the lists. Who got in? Who didn't? Who was left behind? You mean the rejected bursary applicants? Ellison asked. No, Clee said. I mean the other list. The ones we didn't log. I don't follow. Carfax kept a private set of applicants. Never went through committee. No votes. Just a quiet directive. 4 or 5 a year. Always young men. Bright. Vulnerable. Fatherless often. Or estranged. From their families. And then sponsorship. Full bursaries. No questions. Sponsored by whom? Clee hesitated. That's where it turned doctor. The sponsor wasn't a person. It was a policy. Special attention scholarships, they were called in the old files. Discretionary awards under a category called long-term assets. What does that mean? It means the college wasn't just funding talent. It was recruiting silence. They weren't students. They were placements. Marston paused the recording. Heart-hammering. Placements. He scrambled for the Linley file again and found the copied ledger from 1947. Toller's bursary had been issued under LTAS 9, long-term asset, scholarship, and suddenly the web tightened. This wasn't just about money. It was about selection, grooming, ownership. He let the tape continue. Did Linley know? Ellison asked. He suspected. He called them ghost admissions. I told him to drop it. That Carfax had plans for them. He didn't listen. Do you know what happened to them? Some stayed, became lecturers, clerks. Others went off to government posts, intelligence, mostly, quiet lives, always with ties back to the college. It was a kind of network. You couldn't resign from it. And what about Toller? A long pause. He was the best of them. And the worst. Marston sat in silence as the tape ended. The rain pressed against the windows like breath. That was the motive. Not legacy, not pride. Control. Toller hadn't killed to hide a fraud. He had killed to bury an identity built over decades, a life assembled piece by piece, on a foundation of ownership and unspoken allegiance. He had been bought at 18 and made to believe that the purchase was a gift. And when Ellison unearthed the receipt, he knew that gift would unravel everything, not just for him, but for the others, the ones still in place. Still loyal. It wasn't guilt that made him kill. It was purpose. He had believed in the design, in the necessity of shadows, and Ellison, by shining a light, had threatened to burn down the quiet machinery of a secret order. Marston stood slowly, the weight of the revelation pressing hard on his ribs. He called Wykes. Get eyes on every former LTAS recipient we can track. Pull personnel files. Security clearance is everything. This was a grooming network, not a financial scam. That's what Ellison died for. That's what Linley tried to scream. And Sarah? Wykes asked, voice tight. Marston's hand closed over the pen Ellison had hidden the microfilm in. If she's alive, he said, then Toller still needs her, because she understands the system. She's the one who can prove that the monster wore a mask of mentorship. Wykes exhaled on the other end. Where do we start? Where the pattern began, Marston replied. Not in murder, not in cover-up, but in the first recruitment. We find the first placement and we find the blueprint for all of this. A silence passed between them, heavy but electric. For the first time, the crime had shape, not a single act, but a program, not just a killer but a creed. And somewhere, perhaps even now, The architect of it all was watching the last pieces edge toward collapse, not with fear, but with resolve. Because for men like Toller, the truth was never the end of the world. It was just the beginning of another war. The night was thick with mist when Marston pulled into the shadowed driveway of the old manor house on the outskirts of the city's sprawling estate that had seen better days, but still held the quiet grandeur of faded power. It was the kind of place that seemed immune to time, untouched by the modern world and insulated by secrets as dense as its ancient walls. This was where the final thread of the pattern had led him, to Francis Toller. Inside, the manor was a study in contrasts. Rich wood paneling and faded portraits of stern ancestors hung beside the mechanical hum of security cameras and motion sensors. Marston's footsteps echoed softly on polished stone as he passed through the entrance hall, meeting Wykes and two uniformed officers at the base of a grand staircase. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Wykes whispered, voice barely above the hush of the rain tapping the windows. Marston nodded. "This is where the network's heartbeat still pulses. Toller's sanctuary. We end this tonight." They ascended to the library, an expansive room lined with bookshelves that climbed to the ceiling, ladders on rails, and a grand fireplace blackened with age. At the center, beneath a solitary light, sat Francis Toller. His face was sharper than the photos suggested, eyes cold and calculating beneath silvered brows. He looked up calmly as they entered, as if expecting them. "Detective Marston," Toller said smoothly, voice low but firm. "I wondered when you'd come." Marston's gaze swept the room. No weapons, no obvious escape routes, but a single window ajar at the far corner hinted at desperation or planning. He met Toller's eyes, steady and unflinching. "This ends now, Toller. The men you groomed, the lives you manipulated, Ellison's death, Pembroke's disappearance. We know it was all to protect your legacy." Toller smiled faintly. "Legacy? You speak as if I orchestrated a crime. I protected a system, a necessary order. The college and, by extension, the nation was built on these placements you deride." Marston's voice sharpened. "You call it protection, but it was control. You killed Ellison because he threatened to expose your little empire. You took Pembroke because she understood the truth. You've silenced anyone who could unravel the thread." Toller's gaze darkened for a moment, but then he laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You think me a villain. I am a guardian. Those placements were given opportunity where none existed. Do you understand how fragile power is? How easily chaos consumes when the wrong truths are spoken? Fragile power doesn't justify murder," Marston replied. "And it doesn't make you immune from justice." Toller rose slowly, walking toward the fireplace. His hands rested on the mantel as if drawing strength from the weight of generations. "You speak of justice as if it's absolute. But justice is malleable, shaped by those who wield it. Linley, Ellison, Pembroke, they challenged the foundations. I preserved them." Marston stepped closer, voice cold. "By tearing people apart, you used them like pawns, crushed anyone in your way." Toller's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Sometimes, sacrifice is necessary." Suddenly, the soft sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Marston stiffened, signaling the officers. The door opened and Sarah Pembroke stepped inside, unharmed but pale, her eyes fierce. "Toller," she said sharply, "it's over." Toller's face twisted for a fraction of a second. Surprise, maybe respect. "Pembroke, you're alive." Marston motioned to the officers. "She's our key witness, and you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder." Toller's calm fractured. He lunged for the window, desperate, but Wykes was faster. The officers subdued him swiftly, cuffs clicking tight. As they escorted Toller out, he looked back at Pembroke. "You may have won this battle, but the war," Marston cut him off. "The war ends with the truth, and the truth has a way of surviving." Outside, rain swept the night clean. Marston watched Toller disappear into the waiting police van, feeling the weight of years begin to lift. The silence that had hung so heavily was finally broken, and for the first time, the ghosts of the past could rest. But Marston knew this was more than an ending. It was a reckoning, a reminder that even in shadows, the smallest truths could ignite the brightest light. The van's taillights vanished into the rain-slick night, and for the first time in weeks, Marston allowed himself to exhale. Toller was in custody. Sarah was safe. The web of deceit had finally been untangled, or so it seemed. They left the estate under escort, Pembroke quiet beside him, a pale silhouette against the glass. But something about the way she sat too still, too guarded, pricked at Marston's instincts. Back at the station, the mood was subdued, exhausted. Wykes filed the arrest report, and Sarah gave a preliminary statement. She described her abduction, how she'd been lured by a falsified email from university security, how she'd been held in a disused chapel room, watched intermittently but never directly harmed. They hadn't tried to interrogate her, just waited. When her captors vanished abruptly the morning before, she'd slipped away through a back path and found shelter in a nearby village. Her testimony matched the timeline. Every piece clicked. Yet, as Marston returned to his office, dropping his coat onto the chair, his eye caught something he hadn't noticed earlier, a gap in the evidence shelf. The pen, Ellison's pen. It was gone. He checked the file. No chain of custody record. No logged movement. He pressed the intercom. Wykes, did anyone move the microfilm from my office? A pause. No, sir. We assumed you had it. He hadn't. Heart. Thudding, Marston went to the evidence room. The clerk, thorough as ever, confirmed the crate from Woking remained untouched. The Linley bursary records were intact. The scanned images had been uploaded to the secure server, but the physical microfilm, Ellison's original copy, was unaccounted for. He returned to his office and sat. Something was wrong. The pen had been in his coat. He remembered placing it in the inside pocket. It should have still been there. Then he remembered Sarah's coat folded in the chapel, left behind. Conveniently found. What if she had something to hide? What if... He froze. The scholarship letter, the signature at the bottom. R.L. the First Linley. But there had been a second one. The name buried in the long student register from 1973, Isabel Linley, daughter of Robert Linley. Quiet, promising, studied abroad before returning to the UK. Married once. Briefly. Her last name? Pembroke. Marston stared at the wall. She hadn't just been a student of Ellison's. She'd been born into this. He called Wykes immediately. Pull everything you can on Sarah Pembroke. Cross-reference Linley's family. I think we've missed something. It took 30 minutes. Then Wykes's voice came over the line. Sharp and cold. Sir, Sarah Pembroke's real name is Sarah Isabel Linley Pembroke. Ellison was her godfather. Her mother died when she was young. Her father was Robert Linley. The line was silent. Marston stood in his office, hands flat on the desk, staring at the spot where the pen had been. It had never been just about justice for her. It had never been only about the truth. This had been personal, deeply, generationally personal, and she had the last piece of evidence in her possession. He drove straight to the temporary safe house they'd arranged for her, wind howling against the car like a voice shouting warnings. By the time he arrived, she was already gone. The officer stationed outside was unconscious, chloroform, clean, no signs of struggle. Inside, the room was neat, not a panic escape, a prepared one. On the desk, a letter in her handwriting. You were never meant to find the whole truth. Detective, just enough of it. Toller was guilty. Yes, he killed Ellison. Because Ellison betrayed him and me. My father's legacy was buried for decades. You brought it back into the light, and for that I thank you. But some things must still remain hidden, not for power, for preservation. There are others, detective, not all of them guilty, not all of them clean, but all of them necessary. The microfilm is gone. I've ensured it will never be used again. Some truths demand silence, even now. S.I.L.P. Marston stood there, breath shallow. The wind outside howling like a mournful lament. She had orchestrated it, not the murder perhaps, not even the initial chain of events, but the ending. She had allowed it to happen, nudged it forward, protected what she could while sacrificing what she must. She'd let Toller fall to protect others in the shadows, those who still lived, still served, still held the reins of quiet power. He should have seen it, the way she asked certain questions, the way she never seemed shocked, only sad. Her disappearance hadn't been a kidnapping, it had been a choice, a disappearance staged to justify the final act, and she had done it all without breaking the law. Technically, emotionally, morally, Marston left the room, coat whipping around him as he stepped into the dark. The rain had begun again, soft and endless. He looked up toward the sky, the questions piling like clouds above him. He had solved the case, but the truth had slipped through his fingers, quiet and deliberate as smoke. And somewhere out there, Sarah Pembroke walked away with the secret her father had died protecting, because some legacies, no matter how rotten their roots, still had branches too dangerous to cut down. The station was quiet in the gray hours before dawn, the rain tapping a soft rhythm against the windows, like a clock counting down to a truth no one wanted to face. Marston sat alone in the incident room, the last few papers spread across the desk like a crime scene of their own letters. Bursary records, faded photographs, the deaccession manifest from Woking. It was all there, every clue, every step. Yet it didn't feel like closure. Wykes entered with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, setting one down wordlessly. Interpol confirmed Pembroke boarded a private charter from Inverness 3 hours ago, he said, filed under a diplomatic cover. No extradition protocol triggered. It's a dead trail. Marston took the coffee, unspeaking. She played us, Wykes said after a moment. All of us. Marston's eyes stayed on the old photo of Robert Linley, standing alone at the edge of the college council group. No, we gave her the board. Wykes sat across from him, tired. What now? Internal review. Media's silence. They'll spin tollers. Arrest is the end of it. Marston finally looked up, because to them, it was the end. One man with secrets dies in a cell and they call it justice. But we know better. Wykes rubbed a hand down his face. We missed it, didn't we, from the start?